Christ our true God, send down the grace of the Holy Spirit upon us and open the eyes of our hearts and our minds to the knowledge of thy gospel. For thou art a good and merciful and man befriending God. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, cut us roll. So you have to be careful with language because in Greek, okie dokie means no.
Means what? No. Oh.
Okie dokie.
So anyway, we finished, we're coming down to the story of Abraham. And there's some interesting aspects to it. Of course, part mythos and part actual history. But both of them have some unique thing to say. Usually the mythos has more to teach us, though, than the actual history, because it's like a parable. And that's the part we need to look at and accept it for what it is, a revelation and a teaching. That Abraham, as you know, was actually his father was called out of Ur of the Chaldees, it says, and went up to Haran. And Abraham and the whole family went along with him. But that's how we know that the story of Abraham was not written until the 500s. Maybe close to 1,000 years, or maybe more than 1,000 years after the events were supposed to have happened. Because there were no Chaldees in Abraham's time. And the Chaldees didn't become an identifiable tribe till about 900. And Abraham's time was about 1700. So the Chaldees were a Western Semitic group who drifted into the Delta after the part where the Tigris and Euphrates merge, and then there's the long, where you have the marsh areas. And they formed a tribe at that time, an identifiable tribe. And by the 600s, they became powerful enough that they gave two dynasties of rulers for Babylon, for the Sumerian region. And it was at that time when they conquered Jerusalem and carried so many of the Jewish nobility and upper classes away into captivity in Babylon. So if it says Ur of the Chaldees, we know it was written during the captivity in Babylon by the scribes. And but in any case, he's called out of that area, goes up to Haran, and then he's called down into Palestine, the Canaanite region. And there's even a kind of an identifiable reason why would he be called, and if you're going to form the holy nation, why would you form it there in that place? Because it's the crossroads of the great empires. And if you have the Israelites were supposed really to be apostles. They're supposed to hold the faith, the revealed faith of the one true God, and then they weren't supposed to just hold it to themselves, though. It was supposed to be available. So you move them to that area where all of the empires cross roads. And then even people, when you're going to send things by sea, it comes to that area we call the Levant, that eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. So that was a logical place if you want people to learn and be taught. And anyway, Abraham comes down in it, and there are 3 or 4 notable stories. There's some of them we won't pause on. You know, you see Abraham falling into his sort of sins through fear. If you remember the story, when he goes into Egypt, everybody went during a famine because Egypt always had the River Nile. But they go into Egypt, and the story is that Sarah was very beautiful, and the Pharaoh kind of coveted her. And Abraham was afraid he would be killed so that Pharaoh could have her. So he said that Sarah was his sister when she was actually his wife. So out of fear, he kind of betrayed her and betrayed himself. And this is an interesting example of what fear can actually do to people. I mean, fear can be very corrupting. And anyway, Abraham comes back up to Canaan. Now, when he comes into the so-called the Promised Land, he comes with his nephew Lot. And Lot has his own herds, his own servants, his own herdsmen, his own slaves, and however many wives he might have had. And So Abraham thinks, well, you know, we're going to have a contention here, because who's going to graze their herds where? So Abraham tells Lot, well, choose whatever land you want, choose the best grade, whatever. But you choose what you want and take your people there so that we won't have any conflict and we won't have any strife. And it's quite remarkable because Abraham, of course, is a patriarch. He could have chosen any land he wanted, but he gave Lot the opportunity to choose the best land for himself. And I think that's one of the kind of examples of people rising above ego and self-centeredness and self-love. If Lot chooses the best land, he has the best land, and Abraham will just make do with what's left. So he's not pushing himself or pulling his rank or anything like that, but he's really a kind of a sacrifice for the sake of peace. And this is a great thing, to make that kind of a sacrifice for the sake of peace. That's why we say, our Lord says, blessed are the peacemakers. And that's exactly what Abraham was. And then we have another rather remarkable story, that when the cities of the plain, as they were called, of Sodom and Gomorrah and I think 3 others, so 5 cities of the plains. And so some of the other, what they call them kings, but they're really warlords, come down and they conquer that area and they carry everybody away prisoner, including Lot and his family. And Abraham then takes his men-at-arms and goes and rescues all these people. And now again, Abraham could have taken spoils from both sides, because he rescued them, he could have taken everything. But in fact, he takes nothing for himself. And he gives a tithe to Melchizedek. The Melch means king, and because actually Tzedek means righteous. So it's really king of righteousness, or the righteous king. And he's from Jerusalem, from the city of peace. So while Abraham pays tithes, he doesn't take all of the things that were taken by these invading kings from the cities of the plains. He just lets the cities of the plains take it all back. He asks for nothing for himself. And that's another great prime example of why Abraham is so special. It isn't just, okay, God called him and he's the founder of this new nation and all that, but there are certain qualities to Abraham that are very important. And this, now twice we've seen, he puts his own ego and his own self-interest aside, and he shows no greed for himself. In a way, he just hopes on God for whatever he needs. And it's provided. The other scene in this, which sometimes can be confusing, I think, is when Jesus Christ, or God the Word, appears with 2 angels, while in the heat of the day, while Abraham and Sarah are camped near the oak of Mamre, in this little vale of Mamre. And Abraham recognizes him because he calls the one of them, he calls Lord. And right away you have to show hospitality. So never mind the heat of the day, you start a fire and you make little cakes. And you slaughter an animal to cook because strangers have come. And hospitality is an absolute. It's one of the greatest moral requirements when you live in these circumstances. And it was even in the Canadian prairies 100 years ago or so, even more recently. Hospitality was so important that people didn't lock their homes, and they always left some bread or something on the table in case somebody was traveling someplace and had a problem. They could walk into your house and drink water and have bread, or whatever you left on the table. And it was that kind of an era. So hospitality, which also involves food, was so central to what's considered moral behavior. And now we don't even think of it. Lack of hospitality is immoral. It's a great moral deficit to lack hospitality. And it's not even thought about by most people in our epoch, that this is a great moral obligation, is hospitality to the stranger and those who are traveling. So Abraham, of course, right away, he sees people coming toward him, so we've got to make food for them. It's sort of like visiting a Romanian house in midday. Right away, food appears on the table, boom, just like magic. But the thing is, all of these little incidents are really showing something very positive about Abraham, even though we've already been shown that he's not perfect, that he has his flaws and his faults. But he's a very moral person because hospitality is one of the greatest moral obligations. And especially in those eras, you know, that the greatest sin would be to fill in a well or something. And the greatest necessity, you dig a well that anybody can take water from, then you're a moral hero of some kind. So Abraham shows this, and then why why would we be bothered to hear the story that God is going to destroy the cities? Why would he discuss this with Abraham? Because we need to see Abraham's response. As you think about it now, Abraham is actually arguing with God. Well, if there's 50 righteous, surely you won't destroy the city. Well, okay, if there's 50, yeah, okay, if there's 50. See, I mean, you know, they're not playing pinochle or something. They're not playing contract bridge. This is not a negotiation. There's something else going on here. What if they're 25? Okay, I'll spare the city if they're 25. But Lord, even if there are 10, would you spare the city? Okay, I'll spare the city if there are 10. And what's really going on here is we're seeing another moral quality of Abraham. And that is this mercy and compassion. You know, give these people a chance. Don't destroy them. So that whole story is there to teach us what our response should be. Find an excuse for people, cover their sins. Don't have to drag it out in the open. You don't have to expose people because, you know, it's like political parties. When the conservatives are in power, the liberals and the Democrats try to expose every possible scandal. But as soon as the liberals get in power, then the conservatives dig up all their scandals. Because no party is without their scandals. So you expose them, then when their turn comes, they'll expose you. But in these cases, Abraham is trying to, well, okay, for 10 righteous, cover the sins of the 90%. And don't destroy them. And this is a lesson that Christians need to hear, too. Because Abraham is chosen by God, not at random, but because God knows the qualities of the man. He knows what's really in this man's heart. And that's why he's called him. You know, he says, I think it's Deuteronomy, or I think, where he says, I chose Moses as my special servant because he's the meekest man on earth. The meekest man on earth. That's why in the icons, Moses is shown meek and humble. Because according to Scripture, he's the meekest man on earth, and that's why God calls him to his service. Now, Abraham is shown to have not only not greed, and he doesn't have this ego, but also he's a man full of compassion. And he's seeking mercy for people. You're not saying, yes, Lord, like a televangelist would say, right, Lord, let's go burn them all. But Abraham is not saying anything like this. This is, spare them, God, spare them, spare them. And in any case, we know as the whole story unfolds. But the main thing I wanted to focus on here was not the cities or what happens to Lot and all of this, but what kind of a person Abraham is. That for all of his flaws and shortcomings and weaknesses, he's a man of the highest moral qualities. Now, what are the highest moral qualities? First of all, he demonstrates hospitality. I mean, real hospitality. He goes out of his way to create hospitality. And secondly, then first of all, of course, we see this lack of egotism. That I'm not going to demand the best for myself. I'm not going to take the best. My greed's not going to overpower me. I'm going to let my nephew choose the best land if he wants, and I'll make do with what's left. And then this great hospitality, and after that, pleading for mercy and compassion for people. See, I mean, we, for the most part, would be satisfied to see people punished Because sometimes we've become so perverse that we think that justice means punishment. I mean, this is a real not only a moral perversion, but it's a perversion of the language. Because justice means to sit in balance. That's why you justify your margins when you type something. You balance them. And justititia in the Latin of the early fathers and the apostles didn't have this forensic juridical meaning. It really meant to put things in balance. And it only took on this completely juridical meaning in late Middle Latin. And so many of the times when we talk to, well, some Christians and some in the Orthodox world as well, and you mention justice, they think punishment. But if a widow's been cheated out of her house and you return the house to her, that's justice. If somebody's been wrongly accused and you prove them innocent, that's justice. So justice is setting things right, putting them back in balance. And you know, even in the Greek of the Scripture, earlier Greek, I mean the Old Testament particularly, viki didn't have to do with the judge or the law court. It really meant social rightness in it. Dikaiosune, which is used in the New Testament, really means righteousness, to make things right. It doesn't mean to punish. And that's why Jesus became our dikaiosune on the cross, our righteousness on the cross, set things aright. And this is what Abraham is doing here. And it reminds me of something that Abba Ephraim the Syrian said, that if you speak about the justice of God, that justice, and he's referring to the juridical type of justice, he says, justice is like a single grain of sand cast into the sea of God's mercy. A single grain of sand cast into the sea of God's mercy. Because God's mercy is so far greater than any human concept of justice. And this is kind of things that we as Orthodox Christians, we need to learn and observe. Because far too often, especially with right-wing evangelicals and all, justice is punishment. It's destroying somebody or harming somebody. And it doesn't have any other meaning. They say, God is a just God, by which they mean God will punish you and smite you and destroy you and burn you forever in hell. That's their idea of justice. Never mind the fact that you might be innocent. And we have to get past that and try to realize what is actually being said. You know, when God says the world is mine, the earth is mine and the fullness thereof, if I was hungry I wouldn't tell you. I don't need the flesh of your oxen or the blood of your cattle. If I will have mercy and not sacrifice. I don't want your sacrifices, I want you to be merciful. And then Jesus Christ repeats that again to the Pharisees. Go and learn what it means. I'll have mercy and not sacrifice. But in our human nature, we want to demand sacrifice. We want somebody to pay. We don't even want to investigate too carefully whether they might be innocent or not. And I think of St. Nectarios of Pentapoulos, and to flee from North Africa, from Egypt, because it was causing too much conflict. He was enormously popular with the people, but other bishops really wanted to be patriarch. So they come along and say, well, of course Nectarios, he poisoned the patriarch so he could become patriarch. I mean, they accused him of other things too, but that was the most severe, was murdering the patriarch. So he just walked away from it and went to Athens and all. Because nothing is worth having all that strife and conflict about. So let's have peace, all go away, you know. And this is kind of an example of it as well. He could have stayed and fought for it, the people would have supported him, and likely he would have become patriarch. But not at the expense of all that strife and conflict. It wasn't worth it. So, blessed are the peacemakers. And that's basically what Abraham actually was throughout his whole life. He lived at peace with everyone around him. He never took anything. He paid for whatever he had. He paid for the threshing floor. he paid for the cave at Machpelah and the field of Machpelah where the cave was, for a burial place. And everything he did was fair and just and honorable, except those few times when he, through fear, fell into something that was unclean. So we of course going to fall into things that are unclean as well, but in the end, are we going to be just, and you know, nobody is righteous except God. But what are we told in the Psalms? Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness from generation to generation. You know, just as Phineas, he says, Phineas stood up in the wilderness and made a speech, and it was accounted to him for righteousness, you know, because he saved. He was actually a peacemaker in this case, and this is an aspect that we've so completely lost, because so much of Christianity is preached with so much hatred and so much malice and so much vindictiveness and just sort of just vindictiveness in it. And it's what drives atheism. It's why a lot of younger people end up becoming atheists, because they see all religion as just either blowing yourself up and killing a bunch of people, like as in Islam. Since we have secular law, thank God for civil secular law. Thank God we're a secular country. And our fundamentalists can't do all that stuff because we're protected by secular law. But they preach the same stuff. They preach the same hatred and the same malice. And that's what we should avoid at all costs. I was reading the liturgy today, and so often we get these little answers in the liturgy. But even reading the priest prayers and things, that it's still striking that neither in Matins nor Vespers nor in the liturgy, which are the canonical services, we never mention or give place to the devil and hell in condemnation or damnation. It isn't there, because it's not the gospel message. The gospel message is the hope and expectation in the sure promises of Christ Jesus. And the fact that however short we fall, if we but try, Jesus Christ is the bridge. He's made up the difference for us. And we hope on him through faith. And that's why the few times where Christ, if somebody's healed, and he said, your faith has healed you. You know, your faith has healed you. And this is the thing that there's no need to preach fear and hate. You know, that's good for Hitler. I mean, that's how he got to power, by preaching fear and hate. And it's how any demagogue or any dictator gets power. Anybody who's preaching fear and hate is after power, and power is from the devil. Lawful authority can come from God. Power comes from the devil. And one of the best ways to get power is to dehumanize some category or group of people, in his case the Jews, and to blame them and use them for a scapegoat and then rouse people against them. Preachers who are pretending to be Christians who do that same thing, nobody should listen to them no matter what they say, period. Once you hear them preaching hate, fear, and malice, turn it off, stop up your ears, don't hear anything they have to say, because they have nothing to say that's from God, nothing to say that's from Christ. And what really gives us the strength to continue to struggle in this life is the hope and the expectation that we've been given. We don't have to trample other people underfoot. We don't have to step on other people's head or use them for stepping stones. We have only to travel on the road of the hope that Jesus Christ has given us in it, and follow the cross as the guidepost, the only guidepost we need for it. And say here, Abraham is instantly hoping on the promises that God has given him, even to the point where he knows God forbids human sacrifice. But then he says, take your son Isaac and sacrifice him. You know, this is his hope for the future. This is the fulfillment of the promise that he'd become the father of a holy nation. And yet God says, go and sacrifice him. So Abraham obviously thinks this is strange, because he knows God doesn't want human sacrifices. But he takes him anyway, seeing okay, what's God going to do here? So he takes him up. Now, this whole story of Abraham and Isaac and the sacrifice, this is an extremely dramatic way that God is revealing to us a human sacrifice is not acceptable. Because all of the religious groups around, worshippers of Baal and Molech, are offering human sacrifices. So now God sets the whole thing up, so he takes the boy, puts him on the altar, and God says, okay, stop right where you are. This is not acceptable. I'll give you a sacrifice, but you don't sacrifice human beings like Baal and Molech around you. You're set apart, you're different. You're a world apart from these people. And that's really a very dramatic revelation against human sacrifices. That's first and foremost the meaning of that incident. And yet Abraham trusts God completely and says, well, see what's going to happen. So, as we read later that he was certain that God had the power of resurrection, that even if he sacrificed Isaac, he would be resurrected from the dead. But in any case, what God was really doing was showing us that human sacrifices are absolutely not acceptable to him. And this is important because it's very easy to fall into the environment where you're around, because the worshippers of Baal and Molech are really his peers. They have herds, they have farms. He has herds and things like so. They're his peers, and then the peer pressure from around him. But Abraham's above all this and rises above it. So there's a certain greatness, and I dare say a moral greatness in Abraham, and that moral greatness isn't the kind of morality that our shrieking, howling, screaming evangelical ministers, hip-hop around on the stage about. This is the real morality. Strangers show up, and you feed them and give them to drink. And when you see that some place might be destroyed, you want mercy. You want to cover the sins of the sinners with the righteousness of the righteous. You want mercy, and as God will say, I'll have mercy and not sacrifice. So Abraham is demonstrating all these things to us, which Christians should instinctively know are really the message of the gospel. And yet the loudest and most vociferous Christians have no concept, no understanding of the gospel. In one of the priest prayers, and you can see the priest prayers, I think the hymnals all have the priest prayers, and I don't read them all aloud in it. And you find so many answers to so many things in these priest prayers too, some of the theology, so they should be read carefully in it too. And see what's actually being said concerning the liturgy and these relationships in it. And you'll learn a great deal from just reading the liturgy as if it was literature. Just read it as if it was a textbook sometime. And to sit down and read the divine services for the 12 great feast days as if it was literature. And you learn such profound things and so many great things in it and all. Anyway, well, does anybody have any questions? We need to stop. Yes.
Since you're talking about justice, and it means about making things right and put them into balance,
Yeah.
is that what the second coming of Jesus Christ is all about? And it's not about punishment?
No, Christ's not about punishment at all.
So it is about putting things right and put them in balance?
Well, exactly. That's why it says he was radiciously on the cross, or righteous on the cross. The other thing I noticed in one of the priest prayers today, I was going to mention it and didn't mention it, that it said that Christ, I think I'll read it from the liturgy book, because I think that it's important. He says, no, not a jot or tittle of the law will pass away till all things be fulfilled. But why is it then that we're not subject to the law? And Apostle Paul tells us that the manuscript of the law has been torn up and done away with, because Christ fulfilled all things on the cross. And when we read the prayer before the emblem, the prayer where I come out of the middle right at the end, it says, O Lord, who blesses those who bless thee. Then you go back into where the holy gifts are and you read this one. Thou who art thyself the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, Christ our God, who didst fulfill all the Father's economia, Fill our hearts with joy and gladness, always now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen. That Christ is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. It's been fulfilled. So it can pass away now. It's all been fulfilled. We don't need it anymore. It's gone. Christ has fulfilled it all. Because the fulfillment of the law is righteousness, not punishment. Punishment is when the law has not been fulfilled. Righteousness is the fulfillment of the law. So by the righteousness of Christ on the cross, the law has been fulfilled. Death, the power of death has been conquered. We've been redeemed from bondage to Satan because the power that he used to hold us in place, that is the fear of death, has been destroyed. That's why we say, trampling down death by death. By death as he destroyed death, as he trampled it underfoot. So we're liberated, we're set free. Nothing to fear here. There's nothing to fear. It's just the hope and expectation. The only fear we might have is the fear that a child has when he's lost his parent in the shopping mall. That is fear that we will lose ourselves or alienate ourselves from God. If we have any fear, that's the fear.
I still have the fear for friends and family that they are merciful, like you said, but they don't think of Jesus as their Savior.
Well,
They ignore it, or they choose not to keep
Yeah.
in mind.
well, sometimes people don't want to follow because they're obligations. And then you have obligations for other things. It's like somebody who says, oh, I don't need to go to church, I can pray in an open field. Okay, when's the last time you prayed in an open field? And why do you want your splendid egotistic isolation instead of coming together with the community of the faithful? This is another egotism. This is another ego trip. But it's difficult, to teach people. I'll tell you one reason why. And I find this when I ask young people at universities and things why they rejected Christianity. I think I told you the percentages that kids born before the 90s, usually about 90% of them were raised in Christian homes, 4 or 5% of them consider themselves still Christians and all. The Western doctrine of atonement is the #1 cause that they give me for it. More than any other, that the idea that God needed to torture his son to death and punish him instead of us, which really means that God is unable to forgive us. He's powerless to forgive us until somebody suffers. So God is powerless to forgive us unless his son is tortured to death or unless we're all tortured to death. That's exactly what it's teaching us. Christ died to save us from God because God was powerless to forgive us. Well, if that's God, then why I wouldn't even buy a used car from him, let alone bother to follow him or believe anything he said. So that's part of what happens for this kind of teaching and preaching. And a lot of people, of course, they don't accept Christ as their Savior because they don't get it. They don't understand why should he have had to have been tortured to death for my sins instead of God just forgiving me when I repented? Why can't God just forgive us? There's something else going on there. There's some great mystery going on there. And we're being liberated from the power of death and therefore the fear of death. We're being liberated from bondage to fear. And yet here are all of these preachers wanting to put us back in bondage to fear. Because you can make more money that way. People will donate more money through fear than they will from from contentment. It's a fundraiser. Fear is a fundraiser for most Christians. That's it. Anyway, we better quit because oh, go ahead.
Just one more question. So what's the difference between fear and awe? Because we have awe of God, right? But not fear of God.
Well, fear is it's like kind of terror. People like Ivan the Terrible. God as Ivan the Terrible is what they're actually presenting to us. That we have to be terrified of him. And they're really talking about terror, isn't it? And there's quite a difference. We don't think about even the change of the language, of course, in English. But when Queen Elizabeth was crowned, she was called our awful and terrible queen. I mean, what does that mean to you when you hear it? She's our terrible queen, she's awful. But it means that she fills us with awe, and then of course terrible meant that it exalted and lofty, like powerful and all, or even stern. But the language changed. So we got, and it's changed in Romanian, it's changed in Russian too. So the Church Slavonic is close to the Greek. The Russian is kind of iffy sometimes, because some words and some word meanings have vanished. Our language has shrunk, and we don't have the scope for it. But anyway, that's what it is. To come before the throne of God with awe and trembling. It's a different kind of fear. That's but the other kind is terror would be a better word for it. Anyway, well, I think you're going to have